Welcome everyone to the first time that Evelyn and Josh are speaking recording. We were going to do this a live chat so that people could tune in. I figured out how to do the live stream, but just one person. We talk a lot about sustainability things. We'll give our backgrounds, but people have commented that it's interesting. We find it interesting, and soon this will be live chat, and probably I envision maybe twice a week we'll do this live chat, and people can come in and connect, and we'll do it live streaming as opposed to just recording. And we've sort of planned what we're going to talk about, and sort of we're going to wing it a bit, because when we just talk, we wing it, and things go pretty well. So let's see. We said we'd start with introduction. So I'm Joshua Spodek. I've developed this thing called the Spodek method. People tend to know me as the guy who's living in Greenwich Village, Manhattan, with his apartment unplugged from the electric grid, which it has been for something like 16, 17, 18 months now. No one more surprised than I am. And something that annoys me a lot, and stop me if I'm going on too long, is that people tend to look at this and think, oh, well, he's just some guy just doing this individual action, and maybe he hopes that everyone will also unplug, as if I thought that that would happen. But to me, it's much more like, you can't lead others to live by values that you live the opposite of. Mm-hmm. And how can you learn to live by these values if you don't actually try? So I consider this like playing scales. No one wants to go to Carnegie Hall to see someone play scales on Carnegie Hall stage, and yet the people who play Carnegie Hall play the most number of scales. So this is kind of, to me, like practicing the basics. And well, you say a bit, and then I'll go on a bit more about me. Okay. Who are you? What do you do? And how do we meet?
Hi, I'm Evelyn Wallace. I am a graduate student in social work at Howard University. I live in rural Eastern Oregon. I met Josh after reading an article about him in the New Yorker and thinking, that guy sounds awesome. Looked him up, saw he did leadership trainings, thought that fit into my social work, my like macro level social work studies, and then he tricked me into sustainability leadership, which turns out is probably what I needed and wanted the whole time. Just didn't know it. So I took a workshop with Josh last spring, I guess, was it the spring cohort? Yeah. And like, I don't know how to say this without sounding like hyperbolic, but it changed my life. It changed my life. The Spodek method, I was like, I couldn't have been more skeptical. Like, oh God, here's this white guy naming things after himself. And when I found out like what it really was, it's not like, okay, I see now. It's not really about Josh. It's about like, he was the one who did it and figured it out. And it was like this trial and error. It's a conversational method. I think of it as like a game, like, oh, what a fun game we can play. There's no like, there's no secret sauce. There's no gotcha moment. It's basically like a conversational mechanism that allows people to tap into motivation instead of like fear of punishment. So like intrinsic motivation, which like any neuroscientist will tell you is like a spritzer on the whole brain. It just makes you want to do things. Motivation makes learning better, makes like makes things land more, permanently. But the Spodek method like takes this intrinsic motivation and creates action, like actual action that you can actually do with your actual body. And it was such a shift for me, this like very subtle, gentle, obvious, and like life-changing shift that now I'm in it. I'm in it. Here we are.
I think generally our conversation is going to be about the changes. So I've been in it for several years. You've been in it for several months, which is not to say that you weren't conscious of the environment before, but not really acting so much. And I'm going to give a little, we're not going to go in too much order, but I'm up on my roof. If this is shaking, it's because it's a bit windy today. So over here, why am I on the roof? Because over here are my solar panels, and it's hard to see the battery, but that's charging. Over here is the Empire State Building, and up here are a whole bunch of clouds. So here's one of the things of how I live my life now is that people say, well, how much does a charge last? But that's not the way it works. It's more like, given how much sun there is, what do I get to do that day? Nature, like I have to be humble to nature. And I have to say right off the bat that solar is not clean, green, or renewable. What we call clean, green, and renewable, like solar and wind are the big ones. They're not clean, they're not green, they're not renewable. To me, they're not morphine. What is it?
The thing that they give when you're trying to get off
Yeah,
of
if
opiates.
you're on heroin, they give you
All
whatever
you
it's called. There's like the weaker form that doesn't addict you as much.
Mhm.
Methadone. It's like methadone.
Yeah, I kept thinking Narcan, but that's what you get when you're overdosing. Yes, you are correct.
And so at time, so I came up. So I charged. I'd mostly full charge this morning, and I took a risk of cooking in my pressure cooker. Not even a full, my regular famous no packaging vegan solar powered stew, which you call
Vegan mash or
soul bowl.
yum yum
Yeah.
bowl.
And so we're going to talk about food. That's one of the big things that we talk about.
Mhm.
So that drained the whole battery down to a few percent, 9%. So I knew it was going to be cloudy today, but I risked it would get a full charge because I have 3 cloudy days in a row coming up, and I don't want to plug in to NYU. And my apartment is unplugged from the electric grid. I've closed my account with Con Ed, which is the power company here. If my hair's all messed up, it's because of all this wind. And here, I'm going to do my little joke. I don't have to do it now, but if I might put on some sunscreen in a little bit. And so this is my sunscreen. So,
Great.
but it's too cloudy that I don't need my sunscreen. When we talk about this, I think what we're going to talk about that's going to entertain people the most is the frustrations of dealing with people who talk sustainability and don't live it, or they think that it's a matter of technology alone and not a matter of culture. And oh, here's one. I said to you how much I can't stand meatless Mondays.
Right.
The phrase meatless Mondays,
Mhm.
because it is an example to me of what I call CCCSC bludgeoning. So that stands for convince, cajole, coerce, seek compliance.
Right. And your like passionate dislike of this, I did not understand for a really long time. I was like, what's wrong with meatless Mondays? It's kind of great that people are eating less meat, right? But carry on.
Yeah, so no one says seatbelt Tuesdays or drinkless driving Wednesdays, because everyone knows if you're going to drive, drinking is a bad idea. Never drink and drive. Drink, drive. Don't drink and drive. But if you were to say, all right, I know you like to drink and drive. Try one night a week driving sober. Maybe if you like it, you can drive more sober.
Because it's really hard. We understand how
Right.
hard it is to shift out of doing all the things you've done your whole life, if that's been drinking, driving.
So to say meatless Mondays is like, look, I know you like meat. I like meat too. It sucks, but we got to go without. Ugh.
Right.
And by implying that, we may get compliance on the one thing. And the other big thing that gets me here is, here's 10 little things you can do for the environment. Close the laptop lid when you're not using it. And it's by saying little, it's saying they don't want to do it.
Mhm.
It's saying it reinforces the belief driving the behavior that we're trying to change. My big discovery that led to the Spodek method was that people may or may not like this or that sport. When I talked earlier about practice and rehearsing, like playing scales, maybe someone likes to play violin and someone else doesn't. Well, if they don't like playing violin, you can't really get like when I was a kid growing up, I have memories of like tears coming down my face as I'm like practicing the violin. My mom's like, one more scale. And I value that I did get those lessons because it got me some music appreciation, but I didn't really like it. Later when I played sports, I loved running sprints in the rain. But what I discovered with, now I've done the Spodek method with a good 1,000 people, maybe 2,000, I don't know, a lot. Everyone has deep, meaningful, intrinsic motivations relevant to the environment.
Right.
And we want these things to come out, but we've been suppressing and denying them.
Right. We as a populace, you mean? Not we as me and you.
Our culture, yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the yeah, what was it like when you first heard? Can you expand on what it sounded like from your perspective of my having a problem with like, and how did that evolve in you? How
Yeah,
does it
so
sound to you
like
when you hear these things?
I didn't get a lot of your stuff. I didn't get it. Like I was down to experiment, but I'm a skeptic. I'm a pusher backer. Like it has driven my teachers crazy in a system that values obedience. I'm like a thorn in most leaders, I don't know, side because I don't want to just sit down and shut up and do the work. And so when I pushed back on like every component of the Spodek method or like your sort of frustration with meatless Mondays, all of this pushing, I think I ended up apologizing. Like, dude, I'm really sorry if I'm being like the problem child. You're like, are you kidding? I love this. And that's when I knew, like, okay, this is a place I can be because every good anything nothing should dissolve if you pour a bucket of skepticism over it. You know what I'm saying? Like everything should be able to be pushed on a little and not fall down. So the Spodek method was like and I guess like I'm incorporating your like frustrations with like all these the little things. I'm like, God, what is this guy's deal? Why is he angry at everything all the time? But what I realized, and this was a lot through just like talking with you, is that like the Spodek method isn't just for the sake of I don't know, doing something with your time. Like it's not like it took me a minute to understand like what's the point of all this? What are we trying what are we trying to accomplish? And when I understood that it was mindset shift, so it wasn't about like me coming in and telling you, "Oh, don't use all those yogurt containers. You know you can make your own yogurt." But helping you see from your own well, I guess my my pronouns are off. It would be like you helping me see first, but at this point now I'm helping others see this like idea that it's complicated leading someone to want to make their own yogurt. It's like a little tricky leading someone to want to not eat meat on Mondays or otherwise.
Uh,
And so like the point isn't to get people to want to not eat meat, it's to get people well, starting with yourself, to see the world with new eyes. So it took me a minute to realize plastic is okay, plastic's poison, we get that, but I didn't really understand that plastic hurts people. I didn't
mhm.
get that. And I think most people don't. I think like the Gatorades, the chippies, like all the things that we like the I was about to say food, but I know it's doof that
uh,
comes wrapped in harm. Like the system benefits from not telling us that that's harm. And so there's like this mass um it's like a hypnotization and I was part of it. I'm still part of it in a lot of ways like and I recognize that and I'm humbled by that all the time. Um, but I think for me, there was a transformation. Like my first Spodek method commitment, the first Spodek method game I played, I committed to riding my bike to like dropping my son off at daycare once a week on my bike. I was like,
uh,
weather permitting. And Josh, you push back. You're like, well, actually, I found that if it's permitting, that's just like a reason to not do it. I was like, oh God, fine, this guy, right?
uh,
Like I was irritated. So I was like convinced or not cajoled. I don't know. Like I was internally reluctant, but I was in the workshop. Like I was willing to give it a go, but like I didn't jump in with both feet right away. But as soon as I dipped a toe in, like, okay, I will ride my bike I will take my son to daycare once a week. And it was like kind of rainy that day. And I ended up feeling like a badass. And I saw another woman who brings her daughter to daycare, like in a bike, and she was on her bike, and we were like, "Whoa!" So I was like, "Oh, this is what he meant by building community." Like we saw each other, like, all right, like we were on the
mm,
same team. And then we were connecting, like in the workshop, with other members of the cohort who were also riding their bike and like would tell stories about going out to fix their bike, and their neighbors came out and they'd never talked to their neighbors before to like they helped like all these layers of what that one commitment led to was like a game changer for me. And then yeah, for me personally, I was like, well, why should I just ride 1 day a week? Like this is actually kind of fun. And then the next thing you know, my friends are telling me my arms are ripped. I'm like, what? From riding my bike? Like who knew? And like the joy of taking the roof off, just I mean, this is sorry, I'm going on, but like just the biking has shifted my role in the community. like, and the doors that have opened to me, and that I don't know, that it was me. I want to say it was me wanting to do it, but at first it took a little push. It took a little nudge. That's what the Spodek method does. It's a little nudge. It's not like it's not a meatless Mondays. It's like a nudge that helps you pull your own self, I guess.
Yeah, I
And
think of it as an unleashing. But
yeah.
it has to start. See, I didn't know that you would like biking. I didn't suggest biking.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know, because before the commitment of the behavior, there's the emotions. But
Right.
even then, I don't know what emotions you feel relevant to the environment. Having done it enough, there's a certain range. You know, some people feel oneness, some people feel connection, some people feel humility. Others, it's like joy and freedom. It's different for everyone, but there's not that big a range.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always deep, resonant, meaningful. But even that, I have to get to from someone's personal experience with the environment. So it has to start with, well, the action has to start with emotion. The emotion has to start with memory and conjuring that up. And that has to come from me asking, but even that has to come from me behaving and communicating in a way to make you feel comfortable sharing these things.
Right.
So you have to go backward my book, Leadership Step by Step, has this, but not specifically for the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And the environment has unique attributes that are different from like leading people in business or politics, because in business, it's rare that the emotions holding people back from acting tend to be things like despair, futility, if that's an emotion, or they expect deprivation, sacrifice. They think it's being burden and chore, and they feel helpless and hopeless. So these are what?
In business?
No, that's not in business. It tends to be things like emotions tend to be ambition, or want to provide for their family.
Right.
Enjoying taking responsibility, or seeing the satisfaction of a job well done. The inhibition is usually things like they don't want people to see them fail. They're concerned about, like, they're not really sure what they want to do in life. Confusion. But in the environment, it's especially now, especially with the coercion and the CCCSC bludgeoning, people feel like judged. They feel they could be humiliated. They could feel stupid. But it's really helpless, hopeless, futility, despair. So you got to be very careful. Like this, if you want to lead on sustainability and you're talking meatless Mondays and you're not addressing that people feel hopeless and despair and they feel like, what's the point? You don't know what you're talking about. So you got to work with people. You got to play your scales as a leader as well to understand what people are going through. The challenges are not, do I know enough about how carbon dioxide acts like a blanket? Or do I know how fusion works? It's, what if I do this and no one else does it? What are my kids going to think of me? What if my spouse thinks that I'm a loser? Things like that.
For being more sustainable?
Yeah, because I was just interviewing someone, or recording a conversation with someone yesterday who's he's a musician, and his girlfriend was like, "Am I gonna?" He's in California, and he started e-biking, and he got something called a Wink. It's a tiny little car. It's like a mix between a golf cart and a car, and it's you're not allowed to drive it on. You're only allowed to drive it on streets that have up to 35-mile-per-hour speed limits. So he's in Orange County, LA, wherever that is. You know, so he's in Orange County and he's driving around. He's still like not going freeways, and his girlfriend is like, "Am I going to be in that car with you?" And he's 6'5", and there's like a tiny little vehicle, and he goes to jazz gigs. First, he had his e-bike with a trailer, which I'm thinking, okay, a parent with a kid, I can see that. But a jazz musician, I'm thinking like Miles Davis, like the birth of the cool. Like, I like bikes. I'm not so into e-bikes. I prefer biking to e-biking. I've never ridden an e-bike, so I don't really know. But I'm thinking like showing up to a jazz gig with a trailer with a couple amps, a guitar. It doesn't seem like that cool. And I feel like these things are things that go at like midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and now he's got an e-bike back home.
Yeah, but it's LA, so it's not raining.
He's having this great time doing it. And then he gets this Wink, and his girlfriend is like, "I'm not so sure about that." Um, but he's done things before that were, um, him doing him going his own way. So but he's doing it for himself. He's not trying to lead the world. Now I'm trying to change culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wouldn't try to change culture to something that I wanted out of culture.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the definition of leadership is, my working definition is helping other people do what they already wanted to do, but haven't figured out how. And I believe that everyone wants a cleaner world.
Right.
Everyone wants to live sustainably. Now, they might not know that offhand. If they associate unsustainability with, well, that's how you cure cancer,
Mm-hmm.
then they're going to say, well, no, I don't want that. I don't want
that's how you have a
sustainability.
good vacation, or that's how you see your family, or
Yeah.
that's how you eat. Like it's not, or like if you already self-identify as a good liberal. I was a good liberal. Like
Mhm.
I believed in human rights. I'm going to Howard University. Like I'm the good guy. So it's really uncomfortable to acknowledge that these behaviors that we are doing on a personal level, like not the government doing it for me, right? Like Exxon's not buying its own products. I get Exxon's not government. I'm just saying, like, if we're bringing it back down to
Exxon's
like the
pretty close to government.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. I know. I was talking to a friend about. I was like, why does Exxon have so much power? Because they have so much money. Why do they have so much money? Because they sell their products. Who do they sell their products to? Us. All
Yeah.
of us.
Yeah.
What would happen?
Here's a big frustration is someone says to me, look, Josh, I can't do everything. I got to do and I don't know how to respond. I know. All right. So say someone says, Josh, not everyone can be as good as you.
Hmm.
We just have to, maybe we have to take these little steps that will add up and we'll get there, but we have to. But if it's this coercion business that they're just like, all right, I read this article, it's had 10 little things you can do for the environment. I did 7. That's a passing grade. I'm done. I'm one of the good guys. And Josh, you're judging me. And I'm like, it's really tough to get that one across. You also feel that frustration?
Oh yeah, I mean, I asked like someone I deeply care about asked the question out loud. I have it in writing. Hey, I just want to check in. Is sustainability something you're willing to reflect on in your own life?
Mhm.
Are you willing to be a lifelong learner in this journey? Like, cause I'm trying to figure out like where I fit in this person's life, if that, cause I need to know, right? I need to know.
Uh,
And their response was, I was like, and please just know that like, I care about you. I'm asking this out of authenticity. Please do your best to not respond with defensiveness, which is sort of like telling a woman, like, just relax. Like, you're never going to get the
uh,
thing you want. Like, don't respond in defensiveness. Like, oh, I thought it helps me, like, now that I'm in the depths of social work, when someone like gives me a heads up, like you might want to respond with defensiveness, but try not to, then I'm like, okay, I can. But I realize that's sort of an advanced skill. I didn't know. So the defensiveness with which there's a response of like, don't come at me with a closed fist. Like,
is that what this person said?
yes, like I respond much better. So like, I guess what I'm saying is I identify, even I haven't been doing this as long as you have, but I identify with that sense of like, you're you're responding to what I said as if I said something different. Like I didn't say what you think I said, and I can't convince you that I didn't say what you heard. So now what? And it ended up like that. I mean, just to sort of follow up here on this recording, that
Uh,
conversation ended like the heat sort of melted, like the defensiveness did melt away. And then there
in
was,
that conversation or a later one?
in that, I mean, it was the same person, the same conversation, but it took a minute for just like the emotions
Like
to
a
cool
minute,
off,
like a minute or a minute, like sleeping on it?
like sleeping on it.
Okay. That's a big difference than like
An
the
actual
temperature
minute.
going down in a minute versus
Yeah,
sleep. I mean, sleep is a big deal.
right.
I
Sleep.
mean, even
But
just taking
no.
10 breaths.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's me.
actually that helped me. Okay, so sorry, but I talked to you in between in this conversation because I felt
Yeah.
like I needed help. I need like, God, what do we do with the people we love? Like who are, I mean, like, so when you were telling the story about the guy and his girlfriend, like, am I gonna have to get in that? I'm like, wrong girlfriend. but but like that's not my life to live. And also like we make what cool is confidence. Cool is like you walk around like knowing that you're doing what you love and people see it and smell it, especially in LA. They're like, what's she doing? What's he doing? So I feel like, yeah, we think of cool as looking one way, but cool is really a frame of mind. And so when you have that frame of mind, whatever you're doing turns cool. So good job, musician, 6'5" musician. His girlfriend
Yeah.
doesn't want to get in your tiny car. But relationships are big, and And I do want to, if not in this conversation, then in some conversation, I want to talk about the part of the Spodek method that asks if after you did the thing, after you did the commitment, the activity, after you played the game,
Uh-huh.
if it changed any relationships. Because it's so like, I, again, I didn't, when I just saw it on paper, I'm like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? Like, how could it possibly change any relationships? Little did I know. It's a big deal. It's a big deal
Yeah,
when sustainability is.
it's a social cultural issue. I mean, here's something I say a lot, is that if we could magically, if I could snap my fingers and change all pollution levels, all problems back to pre-industrial levels, but we kept our culture,
Right.
we'd be right back here, and like faster than anyone would expect, and you know, keep plowing past there.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't change our culture, so here are the stages of sustainability that people go through.
Right.
People, there's a lot of people who just don't see a problem whatsoever, but that's really small number, especially in the United States, which is like the most polluting place. So then there's a few people who get of that. Then there are people who get that there's some issues, and of them, some of them will start studying it, and of them, some of them will start acting, and of them, some of them, we're losing numbers at each, you know, we're funneling smaller numbers, and eventually people reach, this is going to be like a really big deal. And some people, a very small number, reach that we've got to change culture. If we don't change our culture for the reasons I just said, nothing else, everything else will, efficiency, if you make a polluting system or a polluting culture more efficient, you pollute more efficiently. You might get less pollution in this one little area, but overall there's going to be more of it. So there's a little wind, so if I look shaky. And then as far as I can tell, everyone except me and like a dozen other people then say, well, changing culture is too hard. We can't do that. So they take a step back and say, well, what can we do? And it's usually something like, let's invent a new technology, or let's invest in some technological something to make something more efficient, or we'll get some legislation, or we'll do some protests, or maybe I'll run for office. And the net result is, by pulling back without changing culture, we reinforce and accelerate the culture. And so everyone is doing what I call stepping on the gas, thinking it's the brake, wanting congratulations, and not realizing that we're going faster into this brick wall, figuring, well, we'll hit the brakes when the bumper touches the wall. And what they're not realizing, so and of the people who reach somewhere around there, virtually none try to act sustainably. Now, there are plenty of people who try to act sustainably, and they're living off in the woods.
Right.
I got no beef with them. Great, if you're living but although a lot of people off in the woods, they're off the grid, but they're still like going through a lot of kerosene.
Right.
But let's just say there's a lot of people trying to live sustainably, but they're not trying to change culture. Okay, I have no problem with them. Now there's other people who are trying to act on sustainability, but they're not trying to change culture, and they're not trying to live sustainably themselves. And they got all the defenses in the
leaders, like the Al Gore,
Naomi Klein, 350.org, Sierra Club, the Democratic Party, AOC. They're not trying to live sustainably, and they're implying, you do it, but you got to understand what I do is very important. So it's important that I fly this much. Yeah. And who out there is like, well, it's unimportant for me to do the things in my life. Spending time with my family who's on the opposite coast, that's important. Well, so what these leaders are doing, are saying, if you can rationalize and justify it, do it. Mm-hmm. Then it's okay.
Or if you're in a position, or if you've made it a position of power. Yeah, either rationalize or justify, or like, oh, it's okay for me to do it because, I guess that's a different way to say rationalization and justification.
We look at, if you purport to lead, then the people who you intend to follow you don't listen only to your words. Right. It's the full package. Mm-hmm. So they see you saying one thing and doing another. And I'm not saying hypocrisy. My point here is credibility, integrity. Mm-hmm. And if you speak without credibility, no one's going to listen to you, or rather they pay attention to the full package. And so we have a world full of people who, if you have a bunch of people saying, you do this, I'm not going to do it though. You have a whole bunch of other people saying, you do this, I'm not going to do it either. And so everyone's saying everyone else should act. No one's acting. But the biggest problem with this is not even that it's ineffective, or rather counterproductive, but that it implies that sustainability is undesirable. And this is the big thing that my discovery, the first thing that I did that was intentionally doing something I really thought was a sacrifice, I thought was taking one for the team, was when I decided to go for a week avoiding packaged food. Now I knew, if you asked me at that point, does individual action matter? I'd say individual action doesn't matter. Governments and corporations, they're the ones that caused it. They're the ones who should solve it. It's up to them. Why should I, if I do something, it's gonna upend my life, and then divide by 8 billion, that's like nothing to the world.
Josh, I think this is a really important point. I want you to go on. I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I think it's so key for people to know that you thought this way.
Yeah.
You thought this way.
Yeah, and
This
that's with a
isn't
PhD in physics.
Like immune. You're not some like magical special. You weren't born.
No,
and
yeah.
the way you live. This is
Right, and in
important.
fact, one, I had a PhD in physics, so I understood the science, I think, better than most people. I had an MBA and I'd started companies, brought a company up to a $30 million valuation. It crashed, recovered. I know something about leadership. I mean, my book on leadership, was it written by that point? No, this is before that. I forget. Anyway, the guy who's now the United States Secretary of Defense wrote this glowing review of this book after, I was with him up at West Point and like doing leadership workshops at West Point. And I grew up, it took me a long time to realize that, like, my parents forming a co-op, they did it because they didn't have money and they didn't have time and they had 3 kids. But now I live in a world in which everyone's like, co-op, oh, look at snooty elite you.
Right.
The rest of us can't afford that expensive stuff. And it took me a long time to realize that actually my parents weren't sustainable. They just didn't have any money or time and had 3 kids. And it turns out there's a huge overlap between saving money, saving time, or rather resisting the forces like McDonald's that take away your time and money.
Right. The thing that mindset shift of like, oh, I don't have the money to, like, my friends in the Bronx are like, this white girl, right? Like coming in, like basically telling us what to do. I never did. I was just like, look what I'm doing. They're like, don't tell us what to do. I'm like, I think you just heard something.
So there's all that.
But that idea, that culture shift of like not having enough money to eat sustainably or to eat, like they don't.
Yeah, they're getting the cause and effect backward.
Beans were.
McDonald's is not doing anyone any favors. They are the cause of not having time and money.
But that's what I was gonna say is like there are forces at work that, like, my question is always like, why? Who told you that? When people are like, who, oh, I don't have time for that, or I don't have money for that. Like, who told you that? Why do you think that? Because ultimately the question is, who benefits from you being stuck in that mindset? Yeah,
so we're going to table this because I'm going to get back to when I decided to go to avoid packaged food for 1 week. Only later did I look back and realize I wanted that experiment to fail. I wanted to be able to say, look, I tried. It didn't work. It cost more. It was less convenient. Other people can't do it. But I got the opposite. I mean, immediately, it was a challenge. There was a period of what I would call withdrawal now.
Right.
And I don't want to, okay, there's a whole bunch of people who are like, oh, you don't really,
right.
But about addiction. So that's a very serious thing. We'll cover addiction later times and how my family's been affected. And
I'll make a note.
Anyway, and after I got through that period, I started, I save money and I save time and I get more variety and all these benefits. Exactly where I thought it would be worse, it was better. And there's a specific reason why I say exactly, specifically related to addiction. We'll have to come back to that some other time. But I found that it was joyful. It was freedom. And if you haven't tried, you don't know it. And so all these people are professing or they're pushing deprivation and sacrifice because they believe it's deprivation and sacrifice. And it's not. And all these people, and then there's all these beliefs of like, well, Josh, you want to go back to the Stone Age? Is that really what you want? Mothers dying in childbirth, 30 is going to be old age. You want all the tax base crumbles because there's going to be a recession and a depression. And then we don't have the firehouse, we don't have the police and Mad Max dystopia. That's what you want, Josh? No, thanks. Because I thought, that's what I thought too. I thought if the cure was worse than the disease, I'll take the disease. But the cure isn't the right term. It's like, people describe me as extreme, but I'm really traditional.
Right. People lived
no
in that
one
organization.
For all of human history up until 100 years ago, roughly speaking. Same with an electric grid.
And it's
So
weird when you unplug your fridge, your food is fresher. You can't just let it sit
yes,
around for 2 weeks. I was like, oh shoot, I got these peaches off a tree while I was biking by. I better eat them tonight.
right. Everyone's like, oh, you must go shopping every day. And for a while I was like, how do I explain this? And then eventually I realized you need a fridge for frozen pizza. A tomato you can leave on the countertop for several days, an apple for several weeks, potatoes for several months. My number one expense is dried beans.
And they're
That's my
cheap.
number. They're dirt cheap. That's my number one expense because that's because I go through so many of them,
Hmm.
and they're really dirt cheap,
Hmm. How much
and
is
they're
it
super
when I,
healthy.
like in Greenwich Village, how much is it? Here it's like three something a
At the
pound.
co-op, the lentils I think are cheapest, and they're like below $2 a pound. Then the good
Whoa.
stuff of like the high level, like there's like these what are they called? Caviar lentils or something like that. They're like $3 or $4 a pound, but it's in the like $2 to $4 a pound range. That's
Yeah.
uncooked or unsoaked also. So you
That's
don't compare that to a pound of like a can of beans
canned,
because that's
right.
a lot of water in there.
No, I have to add that I've discovered the little dish I use to make the food that you taught me how to cook is a quarter cup. It's like a dried quarter cup of beans. Even if I soak them and they get bigger, that's like still a quarter cup of dried beans. And that's with all the other stuff, the grains and the hard veggies and all of it. That makes
Uh-huh.
two big plates of food. A
Yeah.
quart, it's like I'll bring it next time. It's like this tiny little ramekin. I should just buy that much next, like at one point and see how much just a quarter cup of beans cost. Because that's 2 meals.
And I could be accused of having a lot of salads and stews, but the stew I've never had the same stew twice because
Right.
I'm buying seasonally, and when you buy in season, it's always cheaper because the farmer's like, got to get rid of this.
Hmm.
Although I belong to CSA, and so there's various ways of saving money, and um, but definitely don't go to the farmer's market and just buy the most expensive stuff. But I I could be accused of having a lot of stews, but they're different. I mean,
Plus,
when I
stew
make it
is
with
like,
black beans and I make the same exact thing and I'll just substitute out split peas for black beans, it's a dramatically different stew, very different looking, very different tasting, textures all different. And the black beans one, I tend to put them in the blender, and the black beans blended are like silky or velvety smooth. That's like restaurant quality stuff.
mhm.
But it's huge variety. Like when I every now and then I just think of like what are all the foods that I've had in the past 24. Let me do that. What have I had in the past 24 hours?
Okay, I'll do it too.
Kale, black bean, um, onion, red pepper, purple pepper, red pepper, jalapeno pepper, no, ghost pepper. That this is fermented. That I made my own super hot sauce.
Mm.
Cabbage, red cabbage, green cabbage, water, cumin, um, some kelp, um, apple. What are the other fruits? Banana, um, little salt, little pepper. Um, that's actually mostly this morning.
Right, right. I have been
Cocoa, a
starting
lot of
to.
cocoa powder and carob powder, ginger, cinnamon, chickpea flour, cacao nibs. Oh, and for the nuts. So almonds, cashews, sunflower seeds, um, Brazil nuts, peanuts, peanut butter. Oh, the defatted peanut flour. And there's a bit more, but like this is like within the past 24 hours, and probably within it might be just today.
That's funny. So when you were talking about withdrawal, I totally identify with that. Before I even took this workshop, I started eating
Leaks.
vegetarian.
Uh,
And I remember getting like angry at my plate at first, like because all I could see was what was missing, like what my food used to look like, and then what it wasn't looking like anymore. There was like this anger, but I was committed, and you know what I mean. Like, all right, well, we're just gonna get this done. And then the more I started recognizing like all these categories of food that you can play with, like the nuts, the legumes, the mushrooms, like
yeah.
the mushrooms can be
Oh,
so
nutritional yeast.
meaty.
Sorry.
Right. Oh, nutritional yeast, which by the way, is most often, you have to double check, but like most often fortified with
B12.
the B12
Yeah.
vitamins, which is huge for all of us vegetarians or people thinking about going vegetarian out there. Like, but, it's like such a direct antidote. And since I heard your story of being overdosed with
Yeah, yeah.
B12,
I'm gonna tell
I've
that
had to
story.
double check. Okay, okay. I've had to like really pull back on how much nutritional yeast I
I like how it tastes a
well.
lot because it has this
Hmm.
kind of cheesy
Cheesy.
flavor.
Hmm.
And I go to the doctor for some annual physical or whatever, and she like checks my blood levels, and she's like, "You have too much B12." And I'm like, "What?" Everyone talks. So I have to cut back on something I like the taste of because it has the B12 in it.
Right. Right. And I think that I mean, I'm glad that you call it stew and I'm glad that you invented this whole thing. I had to relearn how to cook. I didn't have to. I chose to
Me
relearn how to
too.
cook.
Yeah.
And so like, but the stew thing, I'm like, ew, I don't want stew all the time. And so like, but you're right that it's like, it's sort of, there's the same, it's like the same categorical food when you put your food in the pressure cooker and, there's sort of like a formula of like the legumes and the grains and the water and the salt and the nutritional yeast, and then usually like a hard veggie,
Mhm.
and then later, like after it's all done and pressurized, adding like the soft veggies. Like I've taken to like grating zucchini now because people are giving away zucchini.
Want some zucchini?
Yeah, why? So when Josh
So
is
the way that we're riffing on food right now, we
hmm
also riff on biking. We riff
hmm
on like what happens on singing. That what happens when you're not in this addicted mode
right.
of this passive just like getting what society gives you. It's so much more,
That's what I wanted to
and
say too. Oh, I'm
no
sorry.
one no one can share this. Like Naomi Klein can't talk about this. I love what she does. She did that documentary about, I think, Chile or Argentina, but yeah, Argentina. But it's this joy is
Hmm.
like Meatless Mondays implies the opposite.
Hmm. It's funny because as you were going through the list of foods that you ate, I'm like, God, there's no commercials for kale.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Oh, I
saying?
love that.
So
So
it's like,
horseradish. I'm out of turmeric. Normally there'd be some turmeric in there.
oh
Sorry.
yeah, I've started putting it in
Oh, and the
my
lentils.
coffee.
Sorry. What?
I'm starting to put turmeric in my coffee with
Uh-huh.
a little like cocoa milk powder. It's like a real latte. But I feel like the ways that we have been sold food. My girlfriend likes to summarize all commercials as cheeseburger, cancer cars, chocolate. That's like every commercial ever. Cheeseburger, cancer cars, chocolate. And so like we have been sold the culture that we're like extricating, right, ourselves from has told us that like yum yum food looks like a cheeseburger, and look at all this togetherness and fun you're going to have eating this cheeseburger. And so we as the animal species have, as much as we like to think that like, oh, commercials don't work on us, we absorb these narratives that this is what food is, this is what yummy good food is, like, oh, it's
Mhm.
just a treat. And so hearing you talk, like hearing you list off these foods, I'm like, God, if I didn't know, I would just think like, ugh,
Oh yeah. When
sounds
I
like
went,
a like aisle in the grocery store that doesn't sound like that much fun. But because like we don't have that dominant narrative, we don't have the advantage of that dominant narrative yet, of like, this is actually good, this is actually yum yum food, this is actually togetherness food. Go
yeah,
ahead.
when I first went to a farmer's market, my sister was wanted me to go there, and she lives off in Queens. So when I first went, I would guess, like I couldn't tell the difference between kale and collard greens.
I love that.
I would know maybe 10% of the foods there. And so I was intimidated. And I would just buy like locally made cheese because then, like going back 10 years, I was still eating animal stuff, well, dairy. And now I know everything there.
Except jicama.
Occasionally there'll be like stinging nettles or something that I'm like, what's that? Or there'll be some radish of like some sort that I never had before. And then I'm really curious. Like then I'll splurge and try to get something like, oh, what's that?
Right.
But most of the time, but I discovered all these things. And by contrast, restaurants are hugely disappointing. Notice I did not say in any of the stuff that I said, I didn't say extra virgin olive oil. I didn't say butter. I didn't have anything refined. The most refined thing was the defatted peanut flour, which is when they get peanut oil, it's what's left. It's sold as this product. If you add water, you can get like kind of peanut butter paste. But I found that I found ways to cook with it that taste really good.
If you're
So
allergic to peanuts, do you think that
don't go to my place. Yeah, don't come in my apartment if you're allergic to peanuts because there's this fine powder that probably gets everywhere. I mean, Um, but there's this joy in discovery. And what did they used to call heirloom heirloom
Right.
organic tomatoes? What did they used to be called?
Tomatoes.
Tomatoes. Now that's the unusual one.
Right.
And the one that was bred to be shipped across the country and to look
Right.
just like all the others. I remember when people said that to me, I was like, come on, man, just get the tomato. Just get the cheap one. And now it's just another world.
Right.
And
Let's get the
it's,
cheap one.
oh, I forgot all these lettuces that I've had in the past 24 hours too. I got a bunch of
Ha!
lettuce.
List. Well done. God, I was about to tell you what I ate, but it's not that kind of list.
And this joy is like, my mom once said to me, Josh, it's good that people like you and Greta are doing these things and then saying that you like it. I'm like, what do you mean saying? She's like, well, obviously it's not, so you don't like it. I'm like, I genuinely, I'm not faking this. And even my mom, right? And if you look at the Greta movie, she's sitting there on the sailboat going across the ocean. Maybe she was seasick. I don't know. It's like a racing boat. So she's been like pooping in a bucket for a week. So maybe she generally was miserable, but she looks miserable. And maybe if I haven't gone across the Atlantic yet, but here's another thing was when I was on this, I took sailing lessons before Greta went across the ocean. And I just last week or 2 weeks ago had my first past the Long Island Sound into the Atlantic sailing lesson. And the biggest discovery was I went below the deck, and when I came out, the sun had completely set, and I go up and oh, there's the Big Dipper, and I had not seen the Big Dipper in years. And then I look over and it's like, oh, there's the Orion, and it brought me back immediately to my childhood when it was just there. And I kept thinking so many different things. One of them was, I don't see it because in New York, there's Times Square, right around there. And so that's the light pollution, and there's all the air pollution. And we probably just heard some sirens, so there's the sound pollution. But let's just talk light pollution. So it's bouncing off the air pollution. So flying around and Times Square, that is a bad trade. That, in my opinion, that is not worth it. And I couldn't believe how beautiful I could see the Milky Way. And
Cool light show.
I could not believe how beautiful it was. And I don't know how much of that is because I hadn't seen it in so long, and how much of it is because it brought me back to my childhood, and how much of it is just because it's freaking beautiful.
Right.
And if half the world lives in cities, that means most of those people don't get to see that ever. I mean, for years at a time. And it was our birthright for a long time.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of other things that are connected with that. I have a background, I helped build a satellite that's orbiting the Earth right now. So I was thinking about astronomy and astrophysics and how it looks like the Earth, it looks like the stars are spinning around the Earth. It feels like we're the center of the universe. And why? So there's this beauty of nature that we're divorced from. Right. We love that access. And when we connect, so the core of the Spodek method is, for me, that's one of the access points, is the stars.
Oh, sure.
And this kind of, the passion that you're seeing coming out of me right now, everyone has that. But most people, it's suppressed and denied. Right. Because of this futility, the sense of like, well, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And there's very few people countering that. And yet, so, all right, let's talk about our community. Because this stuff has grown in ways that before when Conrad and I were starting that workshop, I was like, what if people don't show up? Right. What if it doesn't work? Well, I knew it worked on a one-on-one basis. And I didn't know if people paid. Would they pay? Would that be enough? Would they want their money back? And what was your experience on that? Because I don't know, you didn't know the self-doubt going into that I had. And you came into it also. Yeah. One of your big things, if you could throw this into your response, was that you were like, you felt like you were bringing up the rear because you felt like everyone else knew more about the environment and nature than you did.
Yeah, I came to you for leadership. I came to you for leadership training, and you're like, oh, I'm actually doing the sustainability thing now. You want to come? I was like, I guess, yes. Like, I have this guy on the line. Like, I'm not going to hang up, Yeah, sure, let's do that. So like, I was sort of caught on my heels, but like a good liberal, I didn't want to say no. I didn't want to like close the door on that. So you assured me, yeah, so I had a different my insecurities were coming from a different point of view. But I feel like I trusted that you said I could come, so I could come. And I think it was actually really valuable for someone like me who had never, not never, I mean, like I recycled, you know what I mean? But
Uh-huh.
I never reflected on, well, I recycled until I was partnered with a person who threw it away. And then I just absorbed myself into him. And when you ask, what relationship did this change any relationships, that was major, major
Oh, wait a
relationship
minute.
changer.
We got to throw something in here. You are a mother of three. So
So
there's a lot of people out there who are like, up until now, they're like, oh, well, these single people, they can do these things. That, oh my God, do I get that a lot? Okay, so
yeah.
that you're being a mother of three, I think is a really big part of this.
And I was actually
Uh,
thinking about you talking about like, well, you can't like people are learning from you not just from what you say, but from what you do. I'm like, welcome to parenting 101. You know,
yeah.
that's it's what we do. Um Learning happens all the time, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. We're watching and learning all the time. So what was like, do you want me to talk about my experience in the workshop or do you want me to talk about
Yeah, maybe
or
what
do
was
we want
your,
to like table this
the, oh,
for
the group
next
aspect
time?
of it. Yeah, I didn't check when we started, so I don't know how long we've been doing this.
I know. The technical difficulties just kept going on and on. So the
Or we'll do
hour
what,
mark.
yeah, so people know before this, there was all these technical difficulties and both of us were like, it's
I
not
kept
like
saying,
we were,
let's do it later. Josh was like,
yeah,
nope, let's get through it. So
yeah.
thanks, Josh. Good work. Now we can
But it
hear
was,
each other.
well, I think it was on my side more than I think, but,
We
um,
figured it out. Here we are.
so let's do one more topic before we wrap,
Okay,
and
sure.
let's that be the team aspect of it, or the group, the
Right.
community aspect of it that came with,
Huge.
and I think it's public that there's that video of us, so we can I think, and we'll so there's Emily, there's Conrad, there's Eugene, there's Nikisha, there's you, there's me. Was that everyone
Hmm.
in the spring workshop?
Hmm.
And we still meet, right? Like they'll no doubt as we do more of these, we'll have them come in and there'll be 3 or 4 or 5 of us on these calls and they'll be live streamed. What was the community aspect of it for you? Because none of us knew each other, but I guess I knew everyone before, but
Huge. The short answer is the community aspect was like my game changing. Like I had been craving community. I think a lot of us are. Like I mean, this whatever. I could get into private property being like one of the mechanisms that divides and separates us into these weird little pods. That is just, especially like as a parent, you're like, I don't want to be alone with my kid all the time, and my kid doesn't want to be alone with me. Like this is not normal or natural or healthy or right. So like, and then of course coming out of a pandemic, like, I need, I joined a graduate program in part so I could just be in rooms with other people where I was like allowed to be, you know, where I
now
was
Howard
welcome.
University is in Washington, D.C., right?
It is, yeah. It's based in DC. I'm doing an online program
Okay.
that does like synchronous classes. So we do like it's a Zoom room. So we actually get to, you know, to the extent that being on a camera is like being in the same room. At least our voices are at the same time. Um, but like being able to join a virtual room of people who, in my mind, were like ahead of me in the sustainability like journey,
Mhm.
but you know, giving myself permission to like, okay, well, we're come as you are, right? And to learn that we were all valuable to each other. So like Emily was the person I had mentioned before about like she hadn't done much biking. Like she had to like get her bike back in shape. And she pulled her bike out of her apartment, flipped it over and was like cleaning the gears. And as she, you know, she's like telling the story to the group, I'm thinking, oh shit, am I supposed to be cleaning my gears? I didn't even know. Am I supposed to clean a bike? And then she says that, you know, her neighbors came out and offered her a bike stand and she start connected with her neighbors. So like not only did her community build, but then her being able to come back and report back to us, it was like this, it's like all the mirror neurons are firing of like, okay, well that didn't happen directly to me, but I'm part of a group that happened to, so it like indirectly happened to me. And it also shifted like in my transformation, and it really felt like a transformation. Like I felt like I blossomed. Like I really went from like caterpillar to butterfly and then like whatever else is next, because I know it's not done, but now I gotta fly to Mexico with my own wings though, with my own wings. No fossil fuels. So it felt like there was this like, as these things would happen in my own sort of private Eastern Oregon life, it was amazing to know that on Sunday morning I could talk about it. Like I would be excited to report, to like come back on Sunday morning and share, as opposed to yeah, just not having those kinds of groups where those little buildups or even takedowns, you know, even the moments that are kind of deflating, like having a group to be there to support you or be like, oh, I had that same problem and I solved it this way. That that was invaluable. And the payment part, like I was in a different financial place then, so I was like, oh yeah, what's money? It's fine, it's just money. So I was happy to pay because it felt like it allowed it to be more valuable, like psychologically, like, okay, this is a valuable thing because I've paid for it and like I have to show up.
Also a
Um,
lot cheaper than one-on-one coaching with me.
right, right. Also a lot cheaper than one-on-one coaching, which I hadn't even considered because I was like, I'll take the freebie because you
Mhm.
you say you give a free lesson or whatever coaching. I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I reached out. You changed my life, Josh. I know this isn't supposed to turn into a commercial like for you, but you're choosing to use your life energy to do a thing that it's like you're like pushing out all these chains, these like chain links. Like so I guess I can say here that I'm leading a workshop starting in a few
Yeah.
weeks. And Josh, you're going to be the TA, so I'm not in a room by myself, thank God. But I also, in my own journey, I feel like I have something valuable to bring, and like I've really built a lot of confidence. And I think that someone who's not so like professional in their like not so advanced, I guess, in their journey, like brings a different kind of value to helping others see. Um, but I guess I don't know what I was going to say about that.
Well, I'm going to jump in. The,
Yeah, please do.
the you felt you were behind in terms of facts and knowledge about science, but that's not
And
the issue here. It's you don't need to know how carbon dioxide traps heat and all that stuff. You don't have to know about emissions levels and parts per million to know like we got to live more sustainably. And
right.
in that regard, no one's more ahead of anyone on this one. I mean, there are a few people who are a little farther ahead, but in terms of changing culture, no one's doing it. So no one's, if anyone who's
No
watching
one
this and thinking,
except
well, us now, there's the
we're not no one.
you, if someone feels like, well, I don't know all the issues, because there's so much stuff. Like
Yeah.
I've tried to read the IPCC reports. It's pretty impenetrable stuff.
Mhm.
And if you want to read about like, well, say we do a carbon tax and you want to read the analyses of the economics and blah, 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 it's like a lot.
Mm.
And if that's a real hurdle to get past. But that's to change culture is a very different story. In that regard, it's much easier. So you thinking you were behind was a result of all that bludgeoning of like misdirection that like that's not the measure of, I mean, the Hadza live sustainably.
Right.
They don't go to school,
Right.
and we could learn a lot from
They don't
them.
go to school the way we think of as school, but yeah,
Yeah.
they're learning all the time. Hmm.
Okay, so now I got to talk about that short from the Hadza movie where this the two boys who went to some
Wait,
school.
we should name what the Hadza movie is and who the Hadza are.
So it's the last of the first, and the director producer was Bill Benenson and his wife. I forget his wife's name, and he was a guest on the podcast a couple times.
And you
We're
can
friends
watch it
now.
on YouTube, I think, for free.
Yeah, it's free.
The last
Yeah,
of the first. Hmm.
and so the Hadza are this. There's this indigenous culture that lives in now Tanzania, and it seems that they've lived this way for something like 50,000 years. But you know, check that. You know, other people know better than I do.
Yeah, 10.
And so there's a scene where these two boys went to some school, started from the West, because the West, we got to teach them, right? What they're missing is algebra. And so they go to the school and the teacher like beats them. And so they decide to go home.
And the
So
food's not good. They're
Yeah,
like,
and the
they
food's
went
not
because
good.
they thought there was going to be so much food. And they're like, yeah, it's not
Yeah,
that great.
the donations of food, which is doof, is like white flour and cooking oil,
Mm.
leading to the first obese Hadza. This is a culture that eats straight honey. But when you eat the honey, you have to, there's this bird that finds the honey for them, and there's a symbiotic relationship that the bird brings them to the tree where the honey is, and they have to go smoke out the bees and get the honey. So to get the honey is like this really big effort, but then it tastes really good. And
Out of it.
so they eat straight honey, and that doesn't get them obese, but our help does,
Right.
because they know how to eat, because they live in abundance.
Right.
And when there was a famine, places around there needed food aid, but they didn't.
Wow.
Anyway, so these two boys, 10 years old, you saw the video, 10, 12, something like that.
Yeah.
And so they just walk home, 2 days walk. So the interviewer is, how'd you walk home? And they say, well, because if I go to someone here, I go to someone anywhere around here and say, do you want to go for a 2-day walk from here to what's 2 days away? They're like, okay, step one, go to REI, Patagonia, spend a couple $100 on like the latest equipment, get all those maps, get the GPS coordinates all set up and blah, blah, blah. Or these two boys just walked. So how did they do it? They walked, like they when they're hungry, they just get food out of the ground. Or I think that maybe they catch an animal. I forget what the video's online so people can see. And they would go, it's clans, so that there's like the Hadza, but there's all these different groups, so they can just go and stay with a couple here and there and
like
stop in for a bit.
Clan. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then they go home.
Well, hold on, your audio just changed and zinked out.
Is it back?
Yes,
I hit the connector.
Yep.
And people describe constantly like, Josh, you're so extreme.
Right.
Of course I say I'm traditional, but compared to them, here's how I think of it. I speak English native. I don't know all the rules of how to conjugate verbs, whatever. I can't tell you those rules. I just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone at my age, or when say I got started 10 years ago, someone in their mid 40s just starts to learn English at that point, they're going to learn the rules, like when to use a subjunctive or whatever, but they're not going to speak natively. And maybe if they practice for a long time, they might be able to. And all my behavior, I'm not going to reach in my sustainability efforts what these kids did when they were 5 years old. Because at 4 years old, roughly speaking, the boys get a bow and arrow. Right. They can't yet use the poison at this stage.
With little arrows since they were 2.
And they just go out and they're bringing in small game. Right. And I'm not going to reach that stage that they did at 5. And so
how is that like hopeful and motivating?
How much look, I have great limitations. I'm not living sustainably. These solar panels are not clean, they're not green, they're not renewable. Red, what's the mineral? Cobalt red.
Cobalt.
Read cobalt red, so that all rechargeable batteries, all rechargeable batteries are slave produced. That's it.
Hear that, Tesla? Hear that, Tesla drivers? And,
but I'm moving in that direction, and I can learn from them with humility. Right. And I'm not trying to live in the Stone Age. I'm trying to readopt the values that our culture used to have too, but we've abandoned, among them being embodied in such phrasings as do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which as far as I know is in every culture we've ever looked at. Leave it better than you found it, which also known as stewardship. The first one known as the golden rule. Live and let live, which I call common decency. They will still exist on a one-to-one basis. If I bump into my neighbor, we'll practice those things, but when mediated through the environment, they're gone. If you want to fly somewhere, the only questions that matter in our culture are, can you afford it? Do you have time? Does it affect anyone else? That's not a part of it.
Right.
And I put to you that trade is not worth it.
Right.
And when people say, Josh, look, sometimes I just want to relax. I don't want to have to think about everyone else with every little thing that I do. And I felt like that too, except now that I realize thinking about everyone and everything that I do that affects them is among the most human, most glorious parts of life.
Right.
That is not a sacrifice. That is restoring our humanity. Glory. I love the word glory, humility, honor, dignity. These are freedom.
Right.
This is much more free than doof and all that craving.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to convey it. I mean, you and
No,
I,
I know
that's
it's
why we're
hard. It's
talking.
like once you've like okay, so there's this scene in uh Wrinkle in Time where like the kids are like going through universes or whatever, and they like finally they're hungry. They're so hungry. They've been traveling through time and space, and they're hungry, and they finally land on this like planet, and there's this beach, right? And like there's so much food. There's like people and blankets and umbrellas. It's like active and community. And this guy with red eyes comes and like
Yeah.
offers them sandwiches. And the siblings are like, no, 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 I'm so hungry, so hungry. And the one kid, Charles Wallace, who I like to think I'm related to because my last name's Wallace, part of the family. He was like, that's sand. You're eating sand. And they're like, no, 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 no. Like, this is delicious food. Like, we're so hungry. Just have a bite, Charles Wallace. He's like, nope, no thanks. And I think about that a lot because I feel like when you're in this delusion, I'm still in it. I really like Cheetos. I'm so sorry. I hate that I like them. They're like the thing that I don't know how to not want. And like
Mm.
it's an addiction. I get that. Like it's not they're in control of me. Flaming hot.
Uh-huh.
And like I guess it's like until you're willing to experience the mild little discomfort. It'll be like you have to acknowledge there's going to be a little discomfort just in the transition phase. That's where I think that sense of like not wanting deprivation and sacrifice. Like yeah, it feels like that for a second because you're shifting gears. You're like getting off of one train and onto another. So like what do you expect? But the truth is like the one train you're on is headed toward imminent death and like suffering and like for not just you but all the people around you, and the other train is a good one, a better one, like one that we can all hang out and be together. I feel like being honest about like that little moment of discomfort but then like the payoff for it. I hear what you're saying, that it's hard to convince, it's hard to list all the foods you just ate just out loud and tell someone who's about to eat a cheeseburger that your side is better. Like better, not just because I'm telling you to, not just because like you should, but
Mhm.
because you will feel better. I promise you. If you eat this, you will feel better, and it feels good in your mouth too. It's not like, oh, I wish I were eating a cheeseburger, but like, oh, instead I'm eating this because somehow it's supposed to be better for my body.
Yeah. Now I have to clarify. When you said the second, it could be 6 months.
Sure, sure. Right. You're right. My sense of time is different. And I
And
also wanted to say, hold on. You're good at remembering things, but let me just remember one thing real fast. When you're talking about like going back to the Stone Age, like, oh God, people, that there's this response to wanting to live sustainably is like, no, we can't go backwards. I also feel like, okay, but you know what else they didn't like? One, the lifespan of like 30 years. So like, oh God, we got to talk about those studies because they were, that's not true. Like, it's not true that they all died at 30. Like if that's like an infant mortality sort of
it's more than that. And
end of the data set.
I had
Right.
Michael
Okay.
Gervin on my podcast who found that it was over 70 years old was our
Right.
adaptive age.
Okay, exactly. So that's one thing. Two, they weren't dying of diabetes and car accidents, right? Like I was letting my 3-year-old son play the other day, realizing, oh shoot, he's getting close to the edge of the park. And then like, oh God, I can't let him go on the road. And then I thought, oh my God, we're all just in these little isolated pods of blocks, even if it's like a big park. Like you have big parks, right? Some in
Central
between
Park.
all of your
Yeah.
right, in between all of your roads, but there's still roads inside Central Park. And this idea that we've like that there's all of these danger like arteries of vehicles that we somehow don't add to the equation of like, well, I don't want to go back to the Stone Age because I'm going to die of something. I'm like, do you know the infant mortality rate now? Do you know do you know how many Black women die in childbirth now? Like, it's in America. Like it's not like we're living now all great. That's what I think it's hard to
Yeah, we're
convince
we're
of.
people on Skid Row. You know what? We're well over an hour.
Okay,
I don't know when we started, and so let's just pick up here next time. Anything. I could say anything to close on because I usually say that with my podcast guests, but this isn't a podcast conversation, and we're just going to keep coming back to this.
Sounds good. I have made some notes for what we want to make sure to get to, but I'm sure it'll be a continued conversation that jumps around.
All right. One
All right.
down.
1,000
See you next time. Yeah.
million trillion to go.
All right. Now I'm going to hit stop.
Okay.